Hi, today I'm going to talk about styling React and why it's such a big deal that React made it such a big deal to style the CSS the way they chose to. In brief, because we've already heard about React a couple times in presentations, but basically, overall, React is a dynamic language written in JavaScript. It can be written in JavaScript or JSX, which we saw is a hybrid of JavaScript with HTML. It plays really nicely with ES6. You can find many tutorials. And with the way that React is constructed, the components, everything is in one place. So there's no searching multiple folders and subfolders looking for what's controlling a state or a property or what we know as like factory-like functions to see what's happening to this component at whatever time. And because of that, because components are function-like and they have their own properties, they can be passed around, which makes React really powerful. Just like these sliding panels, this is something that you're allowed to do with React. You can create a component that you can pick up and move in the same view of your DOM or app. So how do we style now? So the problem with CSS is basically it was originally designed to be like one file way back in the day whenever CSS was created. And with that in mind, specificity wins, order matters, and once people started building bigger apps, this became really hard to manage and it didn't scale very well. CSS has global variables. And it's pretty much the only language that still gets away with this. Any other coding language has really strict rules about using global variables and why they're so bad. It's one of the first things we learn when we're learning JavaScript. It has dependencies, which means that you're required to know where every bit of CSS is written for the app to work. Again, it's like searching through folders to figure out what piece of CSS is handling this. Dead code is not handled with regular CSS. It's really hard for any kind of cleaner to come in and clean up your CSS. It doesn't know what variables are not being used because they're all global. But there are some, plugins that exist now to deal with this, like Gulp and Webpack. Minification is not really handled with CSS, and it's necessary because CSS files can get huge and add up, and as projects get bigger, it's really hard to manage this. CSS shares constants, which means that you require like multiple naming conventions such as BEM or adding more specificity to your CSS classes to make sure that you're only targeting that one specific thing, which makes it non-deterministic. So in the browser, if you're like on a page and you want to update a button by changing its color, if you go back to another page and want to change another button to that color, you're going to have to get really specific if you go back because it's not going to keep that color. It's just really hard to target non-deterministic styles or resolution. And isolation. So unless, again, you have to make your classes really specific in order for this to be handled and for unnecessary, unwanted styles to happen. So I found this quote from CSS-TRICKS, and it's explaining why React chose to combine and make a hybrid of JavaScript with HTML. And basically they realized, and it sparked a hot topic that's current now in the scene, that as CSS is this only language that's allowed to be global, but all the other languages are not. React was like, why is that the case? Like, why is it that we make JavaScript components, and they decided to put their HTML into their JavaScript components because that's what you want for that specific piece of HTML. Why not the same thing also for your CSS? So there's many answers and many approaches to like what's out there now and how to solve this. But React's answer is to use inline styles, which is not really inline styles, but that's what they call it. Basically, inline styles are more of a reference to a rule that you're creating in the same file where your component and your JSX is written. And doing it this way, you're not applying the style directly to the component. You're actually, you're only updating it in the virtual DOM. So it actually is really quick to render this way, and it's really easy to write. It's just a plain old JavaScript object, which we all know how to do. Down at the bottom, this tiny little style sheet, which is with React, you can access styles with doing a const styles object, and React Native gives you stylesheet.create. So two, like, barely off syntaxes, but easy to remember. So in a more complex example, this is a piece of our code from our Stackathon that I truncated. But basically, it's telling you that the state is being updated, as we saw, using the constructor and super. But you can also do this for on button press, you're updating like the color. So the styles for this piece of code just looks like CSS. It's really simple and straightforward. It's really not that bad the way that it's written inline here to access. This is the inline styles part. Like, that doesn't like make your HTML file or what you're writing huge. It's still pretty easy and clean to read when you refer to it this way inline. And so it's not that bad to read through, and it's maintainable, and you know where to go to update whatever you want to update for your HTML. The disadvantages, though, of inline styles, there's no pseudo selectors. That's like a special thing that CSS has. So no hover, focus, active states, no media queries, because you're not declaring those in a separate CSS file, and no auto caching, which is something that the browser automatically does now for CSS, which you can accomplish with JavaScript, but takes a little more effort. But they solve a lot of the problems that they wanted to solve about CSS to begin with. There's no more global variables. They cleared the dependencies because it's only going to be exported for that component in that file. Dead code is eliminated because JavaScript automatically gets crawled and cleaned up when unused variables exist. Minification is possible also, and there's no more sharing constants. So like I mentioned before, the syntax is a little bit different with React and React Native, but also, yes, React can be written in just JavaScript, which is a little bit harder. It just requires a little bit more syntax. But in ES5, you can update the styles via the prop types, and which is not difficult to do. But the main reason they had to come up with this is because it was their way of having a resolution for non-determinism. And in ES5, you can just use that with the prop types. And it also allows you to write JavaScript functions to take care of conditionals, so that when you want styles to be updated, it's talking to the prop type of the component and checking to see what the style is, and it will update it if it's not. Pretty simple to use functions. We all know how to do that. With ES6, it looks a lot prettier. It's really intended to like promote, you know, how the other languages are already written. And it gives us a constructor object where you can set the state and use the props. And again, you can use these to specify where you want certain things to be changed right there in line with the function. It's really a really nice and easy way to access how you want to change specific things on your component. So that also solves isolation because you're just using JavaScript rules and conditionals. And the good news is you can still use CSS and SASS in React if you really, really want to. You just have to require the CSS file where you want the styles for your component to be. And in that component at the top, it'll render that CSS that you've tied to it. The consensus, if you're doing it that way that I've read, is if you're going to use CSS or you prefer it, SASS, BEM, and Gulp combined are pretty much what React was going for with their inline styles to begin with. And tons of libraries exist currently to like help make styling React components really easy anyway, so they have a lot of support for the way that they want their styles to be. And here are my references. Thank you.